Parents of children at CBF, our fall schedule kicks off on August 14th. We will have Awana at 9 a.m. and Sunday school at 10:45. If you're not familiar with Awana, it is a program that emphasizes discipleship and scripture memorization. And our Sunday school class will begin a curriculum that covers the Bible over 3 years. We would love to see your kids there. All classes run from birth all the way up to 5th grade. Ladies, a new Life with God study begins on Sunday, August 28th. Life with God is a series of small group spiritual formation experiences. Each semester explores a different aspect of relational theology and scripture. If you have questions, you want to know more, join us upstairs in room 203 right after the service today for a quick informational meeting. Contact Cheryl Graves with any questions. Hey parents, the summer has been busy and we have not forgotten about you. Come enjoy a night out, kid-free, on September 16th. You can drop your kids off here at CBF from 6 to 8 p.m. Enjoy an evening out together. We'll have dinner, crafts, and games for the kids. The cost is $5 per child ages birth to 5th grade, but the space is limited. We are also needing help from our 6th through 12th graders, and if you'd like to register for that, you need to do that by September 11th. For more information, contact Jenny Lewis. We're excited to offer a variety of Bible studies this fall at CBF. Our co-ed studies include Grace and Eclipse, The Art of Parenting, Crown Biblical Financial Study, the Epistle of James, and Things to Know So You Can Grow. All the details about these and other classes and the links to register can be found on our website. We also have studies that are specific to men and women. There is Life with God, Discerning the Voice of God, and the Men's Wednesday Night Bible Study. And again, all the details about these great studies and classes can be found on our website as well as the links to register. Ladies, it's another fun season of the 3 joys: joy in movement, joy in community, and joy in God's grace. We're kicking off on Saturday, September 10th at 8:45 a.m. at CBF. Come join W3 for a fun morning being women of the Word. And if you like all the latest word games, this workout will be for you. Bring water, mat, weights, and a friend. We will have door prizes, new friends, and so much fun. Contact Lori Bryant with any questions. Our connection dinners are continuing through the summer and everyone is invited. Join us for a relaxed dinner with other CBF families. There is absolutely no commitment for coming, but we ask for you to RSVP at least 5 days in advance. Visit our website for more information or to RSVP, and you can direct any questions to Tammy Hogan.
Good morning. We're so glad you chose to worship with us this morning online. Just want to let you know we also have services in person at 9 a.m. and 10:45 on Sunday mornings. We'd love to see you there, meet you, get to know you, and welcome you into our community here at CBF. Now join us as we transition into our worship time.
I'll never be more loved than I am right now. I wasn't holding you up, so there's nothing I can do to let you down. It doesn't take a trophy to make you proud. I'll never be more loved than I am right now.
I'm going through a storm, but I won't go down. I hear your voice carried in the rhythm of the wind to call me out. You would cross an ocean so I wouldn't drown. You've never been closer than you are right now. Jireh, you are enough. Jireh, you are enough. I will be content in every circumstance. You are Jireh, you are enough. Forever enough, always enough, more than enough. Forever enough, always enough, more than enough. I don't want to forget how I feel right now on the mountaintop.
I can see so clear what it's all about. Stay by my side when the sun goes down. Don't want to forget how I feel right now. You are Jireh, you are enough. Jireh, you are enough. I will be content in every circumstance. You are Jireh, you are enough. Forever enough, always enough, more than enough. Yes, sir. Forever enough, always enough, more than enough.
I'm already loved. I'm already chosen. I know who I am. I know what you've spoken. I'm already loved more than I could imagine. And that is enough. I'm already loved. I'm already chosen. Know who I am. Know what you've spoken. I'm already loved more than I could imagine. And that is enough. You are Jireh, you are enough. Jireh, you are enough. I will be content in every circumstance. You are Jireh, you are enough. You are Jireh, you are enough. Jireh, you are enough. I will be content in every circumstance. You are Jireh, oh, you are enough. Forever enough, always enough, more than 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 enough.
If you're our guest, once again, we'd like to welcome you. My name is Nathan Lee. I'm the Associate Pastor of Family Ministry, and I've been part of our teaching team this summer as our senior pastor has been on sabbatical, and I looked in the mirror this morning and realized that I am legitimately dressed just like him. I think he actually has this shirt, so you'll feel at home right now because I'm a stand-in for Barkef, so I've got to start doing push-ups. We are continuing in our series in Hebrews 11 by faith, where we have been talking about this list of individuals who by faith accomplished great things in God's name by his power. And over the last couple of weeks, we have talked about a list of individuals that, didn't always have great moments in their life. We've talked a lot about how God uses broken people who fail to complete and accomplish his plan. Today, we are talking about David. And David, while we know had those moments in his life, he wasn't perfect. I want to focus in today on one of the best stories in David's life. It's the one we loved when we were kids. We're going to talk about Goliath today. I don't see why we shouldn't, because it is such a tremendous testimony of God's power in working through someone that the world would look at and say, there's no way that this individual can accomplish what he sets out to do. But as we're going to see from David, that is because David was dependent upon God and not what we would consider, what we would look at, the world would look at, as externally
appealing or pleasing. We have this list in Hebrews 11, and I'm not going to read the first part where we have the names that were listed, but we've been through Samson and Gideon and Jephthah last week. But I want to talk about the descriptions of what these men did. It says, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight. Now, if you were to sit there and read that list and think about it, most of that describes David, right? A man who takes up a significant portion of the Old Testament. God accomplished these things through him. We know that David, ultimately, the Philistine, they kind of were always a problem. We know that came to an end under David. We know this story of Goliath, where David went and slayed this massive warrior that everybody was afraid of. We know all of these stories about David in which he was successful because of a promise that he placed his faith in, that God had told him was going to happen. And yet David also followed God in obedience and recognized that he was the source of his victory. Now, I have a very close tie to David in my family. In 1979, I got to play David in my kindergarten graduation. We have a photo. Look at that cute kid, right? That was my mother made. That's Moses, by the way, standing next to me. He was on my baseball team. That's Johnny Barwick. I actually remembered that. I don't know who played Joseph on the other side, but I remember him. So my mother made that costume. That is a pillowcase. If you lived in the 70s, you recognize that pillowcase. My dad made me a sling. I'm holding it in my left hand. It was actually a legitimate sling because they told me I could have a slingshot. And of course, he steps in and goes, that's not what they had. I'll be right back. And I don't know if he slaughtered an animal and tanned the leather and made it, but he came back with a leather sling. Who knows? But I wasn't allowed to use it, so that was disappointing. I would sing you the song, but I don't think I can remember it. What's interesting is 20 minutes later, I played a shepherd at the Christmas portion of it. It was like, oh, you're David. Oh, you look just like a shepherd. Quick, go. But David, as a kid, one of my favorite portions of the Bible, because who doesn't want to be a hero? Who doesn't want to be that individual who goes out on the battlefield and wins when everybody else expected them not to? That would be so cool. I can't even win a board game against my kids. We played Monopoly the other day, and I just got slammed. It was really bad. By my wife, by the way, so don't ever play against her. She fights dirty. But we know that David became a mighty warrior. We know he put armies to flight. We know that God anointed him as king because God says he's a man after his own heart, which we'll look at in a few minutes. But in order to continue in the story, we have to set the stage of what is going on in Israel. We talked about the era of the judges where Israel was going up and down in their cycle of sin and then calling out to God when they were oppressed by these nations, and then God would deliver them and then they'd fall back into it. And we are transitioning out of that era into what is going to become the monarchy of Israel. And Samuel is that transition point, as we know. We're not going to talk a lot about Samuel because actually Brian's, his preaching next week is on Samuel. We're not going to cover a lot of that. But we know that God chose Samuel, raised him up, and he was leading. And the elders of Israel come to him and say, hey, we have something we want. And this is what it says. It says, then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, behold, you have grown old. Nice. And your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations. So we got two issues here. Samuel's getting old. He's coming towards the end of his life. The other thing is he has two sons who have been acting in that role of judge, but they are corrupt. It says that they were perverting justice among the people. So those are not the guys that we want to take over. So here's what we want. We want a king. And we want a king to make us look like everybody else. That's the issue, right? God had made provisions for a king within Israel. The issue is they're coming to him, to Samuel saying, we need a king so that we'll look like everybody else. The problem is, what was Israel's role? They were to be set apart. They were to be different. But they're saying, we want to be like them. A king makes us look more stable. A king makes us look like we're tough guys and we don't want to appear weak. But remember, who is the ultimate king of Israel? It's God. It's God. And we know that when he says you can have a king, but he's going to need to follow me. Because here's the issue. He's going to tax you. He's going to put your children, they're going to have to fight in his army. Having a king isn't always as hunky-dory as you think it is, and I am your king. And you think about that. Hasn't God provided everything they've needed? And yet they're saying, we need this. And so God allows them to have a king. And we know that king ultimately is Saul. That's the first king of Israel. That he's presented to the people. The people look at him. Saul's tall. He's a good-looking dude. He looks strong, and they go, that's the guy we want. And it's not necessarily the guy that God had in mind, as we're going to see. It says Samuel raised up Saul. He anointed him. God raised up Saul, I should say. Samuel anointed him. He becomes king, and over the course of his rule, Saul makes a series of mistakes, some pretty significant mistakes. And Samuel, after one of those, comes to him and says to Saul, you have acted foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. Notice that. God would have if you'd been obedient. But now your kingdom shall not endure. The Lord has sought out for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Now, what I love and what I find so interesting is for Saul to hear, I have taken away your kingdom by God through Samuel, and I've already got your replacement. I already know the guy. And he is going to move into your spot, and he is going to rule over his people because God has appointed him. God has said, this is the guy who's going to take over. And this is going to set up the rise of the king God wants. The kind of king, as we said, is a man after God's own heart that is going to put God first. That's going to recognize that in order to be a king, in order to lead, in order to be strong, he's going to have to live in obedience and dependence upon God. And so Saul has been rejected by God. This hits Samuel really hard. And he's grieving, the Lord says. He comes to him and says, how long will you grieve over Saul since I have rejected him? So he says, hey, Samuel, it's time to move on. How long are you going to do this? I've already told you, we know earlier, because Samuel's the one that relayed the message, I've already got the next guy. Why are you going to keep harping on this? Let's get up and let's go. He says, fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons. But Samuel said, how can I go? When Saul hears of it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. You shall invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me the one whom I designate to you. By the way, I think we corrected them, but this morning our chapter numbers were a little bit wrong. That's my fault. But we're going to be in 16 and 17 today in 1 Samuel. But God says, it's time to move on. I need you to go to Bethlehem to meet this guy Jesse. That is where your new king is. So get up. And Samuel has a little bit of fear. He's like, well, wait, Saul's still sitting on the throne, and I'm going to find the guy who's going to take over for him? I don't think that's necessarily the most unrisky move there possibly could be. I don't even think that's a word. Might be the riskiest move I could do. And God says, no, follow my direction. Here's what I'm going to do. You go and make the sacrifice, and while you're there, I'm going to point this guy out so you'll know who it is. And we know that story. Samuel goes to Jesse's home, and he says, you have sons, and he starts bringing the sons in front of him, and they look good, big, strong guys. And every time Samuel goes, okay, that might be the guy, God says, nope, that's not him. Nope, that's not him. No, that's not him. And he finally says, Samuel, here's the thing. God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. This is important through this whole story of Goliath, because the story of Goliath presents what the world considers to be strong, what the world considers to be what you want to aspire to. And God says, no, it's what's in here that's most important. And they go through this entire line of guys, and finally Samuel says, is there anybody else? And Jesse says, well, there's the youngest. He's out in the field tending the sheep. I can go get him. And he said, yeah, go get him. And they bring David in. And we're told David was a good-looking guy. He was young, but he was a good-looking guy. And yet God says, that's the one. Not because he's good-looking, but because of what's here. And so Samuel has him kneel, and he anoints David as king. And it says that when he anointed him, that the Spirit came upon him. It says, then Samuel took the horn of oil, anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. Did not leave. And Samuel arose and went to Ramah. Now let's go back to a man after God's own heart. What does that mean? One day my daughter is going to get married. I cringe at that day. No, because I know he's going to be an awesome guy. But when that guy walks in and I meet him for the first time, I hope there's this moment where we stand there and he introduces himself and he tells me all the things that he's interested in and all the things that we love, and I can turn to Jessica and go, that's a man after my heart. Because he loves the things that I love. He's about the things that I'm about. He loves my daughter. Not as much as I do, but a lot. He's a man after my heart. You've heard that phrase. We've used that phrase. And so when we talk about David being a man after God's own heart, Dr. Swindoll said this: what does it mean to be a person after God's own heart? Seems to me it means that you are a person whose life is in harmony with the Lord. What is important to him is important to you. What burdens him burdens you. When he says go to the right, you go to the right. When he says stop that in your life, you stop it. When he says this is wrong and I want you to change, you come to terms with it because you have a heart for God. If I read that correctly, that means each and every one of us can be men and women after God's own heart. That's comforting. That's pretty incredible. Because with growing up, I used to think, if God loves all of us equally, what was so special about David? Why was he God's favorite? But no, this is about what David was about, which is what the Lord is about. And after he anoints him, the Spirit comes upon David. We know that the Spirit departed Saul, and Saul was actually tormented, it says, by an evil spirit. And in that, David now finds himself in the court of Saul because he's a great harp player. He can really shred some licks. And they bring him in because his playing soothes Saul. But not only that, David becomes Saul's armor bearer. Now, let that sink in. The guy who is supposed to take the throne after the guy who's sitting on the throne is now serving the guy who's on the throne. I don't know about you, but I don't know if I can keep my mouth shut about that. Hey, Saul, how long are you going to be there? Because you're sitting in my seat. But it says that David, and we see this through his life, he serves Saul because he says it's God's time, it's God's power, it is God's decision, and who am I to step in and take that from him and try to make this happen on my own? And so we see right away, here's this man, this young man, who says, God's made this promise, I know he will fulfill it, so I'm not going to try to take this into my own hands. I will do what I'm supposed to. And so he serves Saul. Now, we know later that Saul is going to try to kill David. There's some jealousy, there's some others. He's actually going to try to kill David, and David's going to go on the run. And even when he's on the run and he has the opportunity to kill Saul, he doesn't. He says, that's up to God to put me on that throne because he promised it to me. But we're talking about Goliath. And so before we get to this confrontation, keep that in mind that David is serving Saul. And so the Israelites go out into battle with the Philistines because they're still around. And Saul and his men are encamped I think it's about 15 miles away from Bethlehem. That's where David would have to ride, as we'll see in the story. And they're arrayed before each other, across from each other, and every day this guy Goliath would come out. Now let's talk about Goliath. He's a giant. According to the measurements, 9 feet 9 inches, about a mid-sized Bigfoot. Come on, I paid somebody to laugh at that. They talk about the weight of his weapons. 5,000 shekels, about 125 pounds. His spearhead, 15 pounds. This is a guy who was born and bred for war. His sole purpose in life is to murder people. It's what he's trained, as we will see from what Saul says. This is his, literally, he gets up and he goes, yep, today I'm going to murder somebody because that's what I was meant to do. And that's what he finds his purpose in, is fighting. And he comes out every morning, every day, and he says, why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine? And you servants of Saul, choose a man for yourself and let him come down to me. Basically, hey, why are we going through all this? What's the point? You guys are here, we're over here. Why don't we settle this like men? You send someone out, and I'll come out, and whoever wins, here are the terms. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. Can you imagine the guy sitting there calculating the odds on that? It's like, okay, everybody get ready to be a servant, even if I go out there, because we can't beat this guy. There's no way. Look at him. He's huge. He's imposing. There is literally no way we can do this. And Goliath knows, he can just step out there and he knows. It's like, why even come out? Nobody's going to meet me out here. And again, the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Give me a man. I like that. Because when you hear the word man, what do you think? Think a full-grown warrior adult. Who's going to come out there? A youth, a young guy, who is not going to look anything like he would expect to come out there. The script is going to get flipped on Goliath. But we know that David was going back and forth. He, like I said, armor bearer of Saul, but he would go home to his father. He would tend sheep, and his father would send him back with supplies for his brothers. He would bring food. And one day David is coming back, and he's bringing stuff from home. And it says, then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. And as he was talking to them, or with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath, named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words, and David heard them. And I like the picture of David's talking with his brothers, and then there's this background noise. Like, what's that? Who's that guy? And when all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. When they saw him, they retreated. His appearance was enough to strike fear where they retreated. They fled. They were greatly afraid. The men of Israel said, have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. That's important, to defy Israel. And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. So if somebody kills him, you're not going to have to pay taxes and you get the king's daughter. That sounds like a pretty good deal. You get to marry the king's daughter, you're not taxed anymore. But what are they worried about? They're worried that Goliath is defying Israel. The nation, the army. They're making fun of us. He's defying us. This army, we don't like to be made fun of. We don't like to be seen as weak. He's defying us. And here's where David's going to turn it around. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? David's redirected the focus. This isn't about you. This isn't about him making fun of you. This isn't about him teasing you. This is about him insulting God. The living God, the true God. They follow lies, gods who aren't real. This is the living God, the true God. And he's insulting him because he is the one that we should be honoring. He is the one that we follow. He is the one that has been faithful to us throughout the history of this nation, who has delivered us, who brought us out of Egypt. I'm reading into that. It's not explicitly what David's saying, but that's the idea behind it. The living God who has been active. That's who Goliath is defying. When the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. So they're like, okay, you need to talk to Saul because you're pretty brave. Let's bring him. And I don't know if there was, like, they thought it was a joke. I know David's brother was upset. Like, why are you stirring up trouble? Go home. You're not doing your job. Obviously, you're here because you don't want to do what Dad told you to do, you little boy. So quit stirring up trouble. And the rest of them say, no, let's take him to Saul. And when David gets there, he goes, hey, guys, don't worry. Let no one lose heart. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. He's serving who? Saul. He's also serving the Lord, but he's Saul's servant as part of his court. He says, don't worry, I'll step up and go do that. Now, what's ironic in this? The kid who is going to be king one day is stepping up to defend the king, who by all appearances looked like the kind of guy who could go out there and fight Goliath. Saul's tall, he's strong, but yet he's hiding back from the line. He is not stepping out to the battle line. He's now sending someone to do it for him. Just so happens to be the guy who will take the throne one day. Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. You're, again, external appearance. You're tiny, man. You're a kid. This guy, he's been killing people probably before you were born. From his youth. How are you going to do this? This is ridiculous. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Now, if I remember correctly in the story of Samson, when that lion showed up, it sprang upon him. It was a little bit of a surprise, right? At least as I understand it. But listen to what David does. David said, when I saw that lion or that bear try to take one of the sheep, what did he do? I ran at him and attacked him. I didn't hold back. I saw it and I went and attacked it to defend this sheep. And it says, when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. I try to think about, we try to assign metaphors to the lion and the bear and God helping us, but I often think to myself, when was the last time I ran in and attacked it? When was the last time I saw something that I could be a demonstration of God's power and love in the world and I didn't run in and attack it? I held back. Because that's the character we see in David, that there's this confidence to do that because he follows it up with the reason why this happens. He says, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. Again, redirecting. This isn't just about the army. This is about God. This is about him. And the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hands of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. David says, look, this has already happened in my life twice before. I have been up against enemies that for all reason should have devoured me. And I went and attacked them. And yet the Lord delivered me. He pulled me out of that. He rescued me from that. Now, what I find fascinating, and this is all hypothetical, okay? At no point do we kind of get a picture of what's going on in David's head other than he's confident that the Lord will deliver him. But I wonder if he's anything like me, that confidence has a facet to it of, yeah, but what if I walk away without an arm? What if I walk away injured? What if I don't walk away necessarily whole, but the victory is assured? And we don't have any indication that David said that, but when I read this in my frame of mind, through my lens, the first thing I'm going, okay, we're going to win, but Lord, just, take a toe. I don't know how you're going to do this, but I really don't want to hurt. And I really don't want to feel anything bad. And what I find is that is the thing for me knowing that the victory is assured in Jesus Christ by his death and resurrection, by believing in him for everlasting life. I possess that in the moment I do it. And yet, when it comes to the day-to-day of stepping onto that battle line to do what he's called me to do, there's a hesitancy of, it might hurt. But is it worth it, even the pain and the hurt, in a world that is swinging at us? And believe me, the world is swinging at us. To take that for the greater good, for the future, as we'll see in our application, the future, to stand before the Lord and know that we lived faithful to him, to experience the reward and privilege he wants to bestow beyond salvation. Is it worth it to step on the battlefield regardless of how we walk away? I said the world's swinging at us. It was interesting. There's an article I sent to the pastors this morning. Somebody tweeted it. It's MSNBC. But they tweeted it, so I followed it. And it was talking about we need a new approach to atheism. I was like, how can you find a new approach to atheism? He said this. He said, this guy is rejecting the atheists like Christopher Hitchens and those guys who were very hostile, and said, here's what we need. We need a form of atheism that, one, illustrates the weakness and the failure of religion, but also brings those in who are disenfranchised by religion to love them, to show them that it's possible to live a good life apart from a God. That's the new approach, is we want to fill the gap of where these people have walked away. And let's be very clear. He says religion, but as you read the article, it's very specifically Christians. That's the tactic now, is to make the new atheism look more endearing and loving than all of us sitting in this room who are called to stand firm in the truth, but also be loving. And to present Jesus Christ to the world in an honest way that he would have us do. I found that fascinating, that it's no more just antagonistic towards Christians. We now have to be loving atheists. We have to be atheists who are welcoming people into our home. Doesn't that sound very familiar? That we are to be believers who are to love and care for people, to speak the truth and stand by that truth boldly, but at the same time to love those who are lost. But yet God's victory is assured, right? He has defeated sin and death. We know where this all ends in his victory, but we're still on the ground in the battlefield. We're still seeing what's in front of our faces, and God's saying, no, look beyond that to the victory, because that shapes what you do today. So David, let's get back to David. He says, this has already happened to me twice. God has already delivered me from the hand of the lion and the bear. And by the way, this is a done deal. He will do this for me today. That's confidence in God. That is amazing to be able to say, this is how it's going down, I know it. So I'm just going to walk out there. And how confident is he? Saul gives him his armor. David's like, this isn't going to work. And when we were kids, you always had that picture in your Bible of like David, there's just armor and a head coming out. It looked like a turtle. It was like, I can't use this, man. So David goes with what he knows. God uses David exactly where he is and what he's comfortable with. He takes a sling because that's the thing that he's good at. And God uses that. David doesn't try to be anything he's not. I'm a shepherd. I use this sling. I know how to use it. And I'm confident God is going to deliver me, so that's what I'm sticking with. And he goes out and he picks up these 5 stones. Some say that he picked up 5 because Goliath had 4 brothers. I like to think that David wasn't dumb, because if the first shot doesn't take him down, I got backup. That's not trusting God. That's just being smart. He says, I may need some backup. And he runs out there and he meets Goliath on the field. And Goliath approaches. This is the moment. He approaches. And he looks and he sees this warrior from a distance, I guess, coming. And when he gets closer, he's like, wait, what? Insulted, I would think. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him. Seriously, guys, this is the best you got? This is a kid. I'm personally insulted. Look at me. I'm Goliath. Look at my weapons. Look at my strength. Look at my appearance. This will be done quick. Let me take care of this and we'll move on. That's kind of what I'm imagining is going through his head. And then send the real guy. Haha, funny joke. It says, for he was a youth and ruddy with a handsome appearance. Not only that, Goliath's looking at him like, oh, you sent the pretty boy. Sent the handsome guy. Okay. Well, he's not going to be handsome when I'm done with him. The Philistine said to David, am I a dog? By the way, there's a lot of conjecture on what's going through the head. This is what I would think. The Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? Do you not respect me enough to actually bring a weapon? Do you not respect what you're seeing enough to even try? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. So he's cursing David. What he's missing is David's not coming alone. He's missing the point. He doesn't understand David's not coming alone. The Philistine also said to David, come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. Remember what I asked about, maybe David wondered if it was going to hurt? That seems like that might hurt. Please kill me first before you do that. But David is bold. He strides right out there. This guy insults him. He promises his death. He promises to feed him to the animals in front of everybody. This is not just death. This is humiliating death. This little kid walks out there. This youth walks out there to face this giant, and it's over. It's going to be over in seconds. And then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. You brought a knife to a gunfight. You are under-equipped for this. Everybody else thinks you're powerful. Everybody else is looking at you, and you're impressive, but you're under-equipped for what's about to happen. Because you're fighting by your own ability and strength. I'm fighting for the Lord who is with me. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down, and I will remove your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Not only am I going to take you out, we're going to kill all of your people behind you. What you promised me, we're going to do to you. By the way, when this happens, everybody will know that God is real. And he says all this assembly, so that makes me think that he's also talking about the guys who are standing behind him. The ones who've been too frightened to come out on the battlefield. If he says the entire assembly, because you have to know that the army of Israel is watching him. And he's saying this entire assembly will know God does not deliver by sword or spear. He has already won, and he will give you into our hands. That's confidence in a promise. What was the promise? God said, you're going to be king. God's spirit has come upon David. David's walking out on the field, and maybe he's thinking to himself, well, I'm not king yet, so I ain't dying today. Because God promised me, so I must be waiting for it to happen, and we know he waited a long time. But the most important thing is this guy's insulted our God, and nobody's standing up to defend the honor of our God. So it's got to be me. And his retort reflects the faith he has, where Goliath is bringing things that are completely breakable. You can break spears, you can break swords. These things will not last. These things will fall apart. No matter how much you take care of them, they will deteriorate. And David says, what I'm bringing, who I'm bringing, does not fail and does not deteriorate. He is the same as he was before and will be. That is the person he's describing. That is the God he's describing. And for all of the armies arrayed about looking, waiting for this, anticipating what should be a slaughter. Imagine the shock when this youth puts a rock in a sling and lets it fly, and it says sinks into his forehead, and he goes on his face, I guess. That would make sense. That's where he fell. And David runs over, and what does he do? Exactly what he told him he was going to do. Cut his head off. With Goliath's sword, he cut his head off. Now, I wish I could be in the crowd during that. And the silence that just went over the, because they're cheering. You got to imagine they're probably cheering before this, and then all of a sudden it just goes dead quiet. And you're looking around, and it's like, uh-oh. And we know that they chased down the Philistines and slaughtered them. One youth goes out on a field, into a battlefield, regardless of how it's going to play out, because he knows God is going to deliver. He doesn't ask for the details. He doesn't say, God, how's this going to happen? He just says, I'm going out there because God will deliver. And he steps out on the battlefield with confidence because he's experienced God's strength, God's power, God's goodness. He also knows that when God makes a promise, he does not break it. So for us, how do you take a story? You've heard a lot of times that believers, we got to get out there and slay giants. Okay. It's true. There's a lot of metaphorical giants in our world. But what about on just the day-to-day where you're sitting there and someone next to you, does not know who Jesus Christ is, and here's the moment on the battlefield to step in there and speak in confidence and boldness because you want them to know that there is a God, a living God who sent his son so that if we believe in him, we may have everlasting life. I was on a plane to Costa Rica a month ago, and I sit down. Kim is in her boot and all that, and I sit down. This was so funny. I'm sitting there across from her in the aisle, and I'm sitting next to a guy who also had a boot, but he fell off a roof and broke both his legs, so that was interesting. And of course, I'm not small, so I'm sitting on the aisle, watching everybody go by, going, please send the small person. I don't care who it is, they got to be small. And a guy about my size sits between me. And super nice guy. We found out we both went to Texas Tech. We're sitting there talking, and this guy is cussing a blue streak like I haven't heard in a long time. Just nonstop. And he finally looks at me and goes, what do you do for a living? I said, that's not the funny part. The funny part is I said, well, I'm a pastor. He goes, oh, I love my church. I said, that's awesome, man. And I'm sitting there, and what was so funny was, I'm not a talker on an airplane. I don't like it. I like to just put my book on. Kim her aisle's a little bit in front of me, and she can hear this guy talking. And so I'm looking over at her, and I see her do this. She had this look of go for it. I got to share the message of grace with this guy. Now, I don't know where we ended it, but I was able to talk about what it means to have everlasting life. And he listened to me. I'm sitting there going, this guy's cussing so much, I may say it, he might get up and try to go find some other place. Either way, win-win. And in that moment, it was like, Lord, confidence is in you is to speak to this man and not be afraid of what he might say, not to have a fear of man, but a fear of God that says this is what you were supposed to do. And for us, it might be easy to hold on to the promise and look at it and go, I got this promise, it's coming, it's awesome, I have everlasting life, I'm going to be with the Lord. And then hit the battlefield and go, oh my gosh, this is too hard, that guy's too scary. But God says this, he says, you possess everlasting life but freely by believing in me. And I have so much more for you if you live faithfully and obediently so that you may stand before me, I may reward you for the life that you lived because I gave you that free gift. There's more for you. But you got to hit the battlefield. You got to hit the battlefield by his power and confidence in him daily, you won't ever lose your everlasting life. You can't. Can't be taken away. You can't give it back. But he says, I want you to have what else I have, that reward. Don't let anybody throw you off. There's not a single person in this world who can say anything that will change God's mind about you. But they can hinder you in living day to day by faith. So this week, when that battle line is drawn, to use a little bit of a cheesy metaphor maybe, do we run into it with the living God with us to face whatever is across from us, whatever is standing there? Do we run into the battlefield? Remember, David attacked. He didn't wait. He dove in.
He's a grave robber, he's a wave walker. There ain't nothing that he can't do. He's a storm stopper, he's a death mocker. Now he's given that power to you, so come forth, dead man, open your eyes, the Lord ain't finished with you. Wake up, you sleepers, watch what he can do. Dead man, open your eyes, Jesus is calling you. With the cross they killed him, the Spirit filled him, the gates of hell flung open wide. He's the same Spirit that lives within us. Step into the power of Christ. Dead man, open your eyes, the Lord ain't finished with you. Wake up, you sleepers, watch what he can do. Dead man, open your eyes, Jesus is calling you. I hear him, I hear him, I hear him calling. I hear him, I hear him, I hear him calling. I hear him, I hear him, I hear him calling. Step into the power of Christ. I hear him, I hear him, I hear him calling. I hear him, I hear him, I hear him calling. I hear him, I hear him, I hear him calling. Step into the power of Christ. Dead man, open your eyes, the Lord ain't finished with you. Wake up, you sleepers, watch what he can do. Dead man, open your eyes, Jesus is calling you. Dead man, open your eyes, the Lord ain't finished with you. Wake up, you sleepers, watch what he can do. Dead man, open your eyes, Jesus is calling you. I hear him, I hear him, I hear him calling. I hear him, I hear him, I hear him calling. I hear him, I hear him, I hear him calling. Step into the power of Christ. Dead man, open your eyes, the Lord ain't finished with you. Wake up, you sleepers, watch what he can do. Dead man, open your eyes, Jesus is calling you. Dead man, open your eyes.
Once again, thank you for joining us today for our online service. We look forward to seeing you at one of our 9 or 10:45 services in the coming weeks. Have a great week yourself.